All right, so yesterday we left off about what can we deduct from all that we've learned. So let's talk about some of the things that we've learned or put it into practice. So question, what happens if the metering jet is removed? And well, let's start with that. What happens if the metering jet is removed? So there's the metering jet. We're going to do this one. Metering jet. What happens if we remove the metering jet?
There will be no fuel metering force.
Hey, all right. There will be no fuel metering force. Got it. So if it's removed, let's see here. Well, then we'd say both sides. Both sides of the fuel chamber are equal, and there is no fuel metering force. Well, what happens? Well, we could finish that. There'd be no fuel metering force. And if there's no fuel metering force, would it run rich or lean?
Rich.
Well, overly rich, wouldn't it? So it's kind of funny if you think about it and you think, well, I want to soup up my engine, give it a little bit more fuel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to open up this metering jet a lot. And what does that accomplish?
More fuel.
It'll give you more fuel.
Yeah, okay, I guess it will then, won't it? Just give me more, maybe. So it would work, but probably not a good idea in aviation. All right, what happens if it's too small?
Too lean.
Okay. What happens if the metering jet is too small? And what do we deduct from that? Well, logically, we could think, well, if we close down a metering jet, it's going to not get enough fuel, right? But I'd say, why is it not going to get enough fuel? And you can't just say, well, because the metering jet's too small. So this is where I want to really start going with the class now, is now that we've learned all the basics, it's time to put it into practice. So you have to use your brain and figure out, why is this doing stuff? And that's kind of where some of you guys are noticing now as we hit the fuel pumps, it's like, well, why is the fuel pump doing that? What's it going to do when I do this? And so you have to kind of think about it and think, well, fluid dynamics and what's going to happen. So if it's too small, of course it's going to run lean. Why is it going to run lean?
Fuel metering force is going to go up.
Fuel metering force goes up. So we can say fuel metering force goes up and closes. We can say closes the poppet valve, or servo valve is more appropriate. Anybody smell skunk? Let's see. Oh, we'll skip that one. Do this one. What happens if the impact tube is plugged? What do we got there? So impact tube is plugged. What happens?
It depends on if you have an automatic mixture control or not. If you have an automatic mixture control, you have a lead between the impact.
I see where you're going with that.
Because your allowance air metering force.
Air metering force will decrease.
If we plug this up, air metering force would increase?
It would decrease over time.
Decrease over time. Yeah, it would. I know we could go into the theory if we plug it up perfectly well and we leave, make this bigger. We could go with one theory that I like what you said. Over time, it's really going to leak out. We could go with the theory that if we plug it here, then this pressure would stay constant and be trapped in there. And then as long as that happened, it would be completely fine as long as no changes were made to the carburetor. But the minute we make a change to anything, it's really going to go haywire, isn't it? Now, one thing I'm starting to notice on the orals is we talk about why is there a bleed between these two on the PR58? And I'm getting this crazy ideas now from people saying, well, basically, and I'm going to paraphrase, nobody said this, but it's kind of like putting a balloon on an air tank. And if you put a balloon on an air tank to inflate it and you open up the valve and you just keep it on there, what's going to happen to the balloon? It's going to blow up. And I think a lot of people here are thinking that's exactly what's going to happen here, that this is just going to keep filling up and explode. So you better put some sort of drain in here to keep it from exploding. Is that going to happen?
No.
Not at all. Air comes in, it gets pressure, done. Right? It's just going to be a pressure in there. It doesn't keep filling up like some sort of air compressor blasting air into there. It just fills up. All right? And why would I ever want to bleed between these two?
It is a create a flow for automatic mixture control.
To create a flow if I've got an automatic mixture control in either this line or I put it in this line too. So that's the only reason why. Don't get that out of your head that you're just going to explode this because it's filling up full of air. All right, get rid of that. All right, so what do we say here? Back to this. I asked a question. What happens if the impact is plugged? All right, so what are we going to, if it's plugged? Well, so we can go with the theory that it'll plug it and stay constant. And if it was plugged real nice, then and nothing else changed, I suppose, in theory, if you didn't change throttle setting, you didn't change altitude, nothing changed, it would be fine as long as everything was locked in place. But it's not a perfect world, and there are little bleeds in there in reality, so it's actually going to lose a little bit of air, so that means that we would lose the air metering force. And we do that, then what's going to happen? Okay, talk about run lean. All right. Let's talk about some leaks. Let's see. We'll go this one. What happens if, well, let me see. Let me look at the drawing here. What happens if this seal right here goes bad? And it happens.
That fuel where it's not supposed to be.
Yeah. You have inlet fuel pressure coming into the air, into the
Okay, inlet fuel pressure coming into here.
So it would push the poppet more off the valve. Yeah.
So it could push the poppet that way, which would make it cause it to run rich. What if it just leaked a little bit? Not enough to really affect the pressure on the diaphragm, but, you know, just kind of put a little fuel in here, which is more likely the case.
Fuel just gets run rich because fuel gets sucked out back.
Ooh. Okay, fuel could run rich because it's going to get sucked back out that way, except it's actually forcing in this way. So in this case, it wouldn't really. But if it got into this one, it sure would. But I don't know if it'd get past this one and that one. But, oh, forgot about the little bleeds. So if it got through the little bleeds, it would come through here and out that way, and then it would run rich. Very good, Tyler. What happened here, though?
If you got enough of it, though, it wouldn't want to close all the way.
Yeah, if you got enough. But note that the two chambers here, if it does leak into this chamber here, into the impact air chamber, where's the only place that it can get out?
The impact tube.
Impact tube. When it's off. So you get little drips coming out of the impact tube when the airplane is off. What does that tell you?
You got a leaky.
Your seal is broken.
Yeah, you're losing that seal right there. All right, so let's let that one go. All right, so let's see here. What happens if seal between fuel and air leaks? And it is could or should see fuel leaking from impact tubes. Could run rich. Possible loss of ICO. What's ICO? Idle cutoff. When we go back to idle cutoff, we're telling this thing to shut down. If I've got fuel leaking out of the system into here, then it's not going to want to shut off real well. So as a mechanic, I'm going to look for leaks coming out of impact tube, loss of idle cutoff, or excessively rich idle cutoff. So a customer comes and says, it's just not shutting off, or it does, but man, it used to be a nice 25 RPM rise, but now it's like a lot because it's running really rich at idle. So how do you fix that? Adjust the idle mixture screw? Yeah, no. It goes back to always ask why you're doing something. Why am I adjusting this? How long has it been that way? All right, talk about the idle circuit. Idle circuit. So, let's see, as with the pressure carb, we don't have enough air metering force to actually cause the poppet valve or the servo valve to move far enough to let fuel in, so we have to rely on something else. So as with the pressure carb and float carb, there is not enough air across the venturi to work at idle. So we have two springs on this particular carburetor installed on either side of the air diaphragm. Two springs installed. On either side of the air diaphragm. These springs are, one, the constant head idle spring. That's located in the venturi air chamber. And that helps add air metering force at low RPM. Helps add air metering force, it's spring force, at low RPM. And what's it really doing? Well, just like with the pressure carb, this keeps the servo ball off the seat. Let me see. And as the RPM increases, the spring is compressed into a housing that effectively keeps the spring from adding force. So it just, I'll show you a picture, but it's a little housing, so the spring, as it gets compressed, then it touches something, and then the spring no longer has any effect on the diaphragm. Housing that effectively keeps the spring from adding additional force. There we go. All right, constant head spring over here in the, I said a Venturi. Yeah, well, this particular one's here. Error. All right, so that's over here. And so what happens is the spring is compressed when that point and that point come together, then it no longer, you don't have the spring input anymore. So in the meantime, it's just, the spring is just pushing that over to the right. So we should change that to impact air. And the other one's going to be, oh, not the center body still. Let's see.
If the diaphragm is moving to the right, why would it compress the spring?
Let's go back to that.
Oh, 'cause yeah.
All right, well, if we look at that,
That's when it's coming back to idle.
what's that?
So isn't the spring compressing once it's coming back to idle?
As the RPM increases, the spring is compressed into a housing.
So it's pushing right here. Change that. Okay, so let me see if I have a better picture. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I do. Ta-da. Constant effort. No, that's not one. The constant effort. That's the best picture I have. The constant head. So constant head right there. Let's make some sense of it. All right, so if the drawing is correct, it's going to go right there. And that would have to put this as the wall right here where the seal is. So the seal comes through. Then we have that. And that is going to push this right here is the end of this right here. So it's pushing that out. I don't like this picture. Sorry. I'll find you a better one. Just take my word for it. Until I find one. All right, the other spring is the constant effort. Oh, I think there's a problem with this drawing. Let's go back. All right, so the point being here is that the constant head idle spring, and notice they just call it the constant head spring. I threw in the word idle so we can distinguish between the constant effort spring. So the constant head idle spring, it does exactly what we've talked about all along with the pressure carb, and that there's not enough air metering force, so it's got to push it to the right. And it's got to push this to the right so that it opens up this ball so that it keeps it out. So if I put it over here, that wouldn't make sense unless I put it in here behind, like if I take this and I make this part right here, the diaphragm that's right here, and put that spring in here, then I'm okay. And then that makes sense. So that brings us, so you can do it either which way and think about it either which way, but you understand that it's got to have a spring to make that work. Then we can add the constant effort spring, which, according to the book that I'm using, it's in the impact chamber. So that actually makes this one the constant effort, and they mislabeled it constant head, and they're not actually showing the correct spring. So we can come back over to here now and take a look at this drawing. So this has got the constant effort, and I think this has the constant head spring in here too. Do I see it?
Right there.
constant head, constant effort. All right, so now we can kind of look at this. This is a very complicated drawing. I'll tell you right now. So let's make some sense of it. All right, so let's label what we have. We have, well, we see the air chamber, and we see a fuel chamber, but we got to have 2 fuel chambers and 2 air chambers. So if this is the fuel, then what is this right here? Okay, fuel. Then where's my other air chamber? Here? Okay. So we have the constant head spring, constant head idle spring in which chamber? Hey, just like I said. And then this is the impact. And so what do I find in the impact? Constant effort spring. All right, so this is making more sense here with this drawing. So I'm going to say that right now with this and this together, that it's actually in motion. All right, so imagine there's space between here and here because it's got to push this part out, away from here, right? So there's got to be space here. Everybody follow that? All right, so there's got to be space there. But as the venturi is working and the impact is working, these 2 items are going to come together, and once they become together in solid, then what is the spring doing?
Can't.
Doesn't do anything, right? Yeah, it pushes back, but not enough to really matter. So now this is locked together, and it works like it's supposed to, back and forth. Everybody follow that? Okay. And then the constant effort spring. Well, we really haven't talked about what it does, but there it is in the impact chamber. And you can see, we'll see what that's going to do here in a second. All right, constant effort spring in the impact chamber. It supplements a transition from idle to the servo regulator, and what it does, it just helps move the air diaphragm smoothly from low to high power settings. So, the effort spring in the impact chamber supplements the transition. What does transition mean? Transition between what and what?
From idle to power.
Okay, from idle to, I'll say off idle.
Did you turn the recording back on?
I thank you for asking. I did. From idle to off idle. Oh, where was I? And helps move the air diaphragm smoothly from low to high power settings. All right, back out, new point. So the idle circuit in the servo is connected to the throttle linkage. And let's see, at idle, the main jet is reduced in size. Well, it's reduced in size by the throttle lever, basically, because you don't necessarily change the main jet. I'll show you that in a second. And I'll show you right now. We'll go back to this one. That's a good one. Okay, so we're talking about at idle. So we have the idle throttle valve right here. And what's going to happen is I pull back on the black knob. That's my throttle. And it's going to push this forward. And it's going to reduce that, which is now the idle metering jet, if you will, right? Because the main metering jet's too large. So this becomes the idle metering jet. So if I have the idle metering jet right there, and that is going to allow the proper amount of fuel around and through. Everybody follow that? All right. Now, note this right here. All right. It's a little screw. And basically what this is doing is it's depicting that it's an adjustment from where your throttle lever is, because what else is your throttle lever attached to?
Throttle plate.
Throttle plate. So this right here is also attached to this. So when I move this lever, I'm moving this bar in the drawing, and I'm moving this throttle lever. And so there's a correlation between the throttle lever, the throttle plate, and this right here. So these two things go hand in hand. What's the big deal about these two things right here? Is it important that they match?
Yes.
What if they don't match? I'm talking about at idle. So what's controlling the fuel at idle? A spring and the metering jet. So okay, so the amount of fuel I'm getting strictly dependent upon idle spring and the, we'll call it the idle metering jet. Really, it's just this valve here, but I like that. We'll call it that. Okay, so I have a given amount of fuel flowing through. Is it important to have a given amount of air to that fuel?
Yes.
Are we going back to kind of, what are we looking for here? I'm hearing 12 to 1 over here. Okay, the proper mixture. What if I don't, okay, so I got to adjust that mixture. Does this sound familiar? And what do we call this? Idle mixture control. So as a mechanic, what are the two things you're going to be setting up on fuel controls over and over and over? Idle speed, idle mix. Idle speed, idle mix. Can't do anything else. At least be able to set idle speed and idle mix. Okay, so we got to be able to set the idle speed and idle mixture. How do we set the idle speed?
By changing where the throttle plate stops.
Very good, by changing where the throttle plate stops. Right, that just sounds a lot like we've already talked about with carburetors and everything else. Look at that. Little adjustment screw. You screw it in and what happens?
More idle speed.
Carburetor, it gives a little bit more air. A little bit more air means it goes a little
Faster.
All right. So here's that little screw I was talking about. That's just the idle mixture adjustment. So what it's doing when you adjust this right here, it changes the length between this plate and this plate. And when you change the length between that plate and that plate, you're changing jets inside, which really just look like you're changing these rods back and forth. Oops, this one here. Okay, so schematically it looks like that. Ideally it looks like that. So trust me, I'm going to ask you on an oral this very question, exactly how are you going to adjust the idle speed? And you will say, with the idle speed adjustment screw, you will screw it in to make it faster, screw it out to make it slower. I'll say, great, how are you going to adjust the idle mixture? And you'll say, I'll adjust this screw right here. I will say, which way are you going to adjust it? And you say, I don't know. How could you possibly know? Got to have a picture here somewhere. Oops, there we go.
Potter will tell us.
What?
Hoppers will tell us.
Hoppies. We'll get to that. Well, you see that right there? Look at that. What does that say? Rich. And there's a little arrow that tells you which way to do it. So if you make the little... All right. I'm afraid to ask, how are you going to know if the idle mixture is correct? I know. I'm going to run the engine and I'm going to stick my face 2 inches from the propeller and I'm going to reach in there and adjust that until I see the RPM go up a little bit and then go down, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what half the class is telling me I'm going to do. I'm going to be a bunch of one-armed mechanics as the propeller takes you off at the shoulder. Well, I shouldn't laugh about that. That happens. So that's why it's actually serious. So are you going to adjust this while the aircraft is running?
No.
Well, then how am I going to adjust it?
1 1/4 turn. Idle cut off.
1 1/4 turn. Does that look like a 1 1/4 turn device? No, it's not. And if you accidentally unscrew it too far, that's okay because there's a thing called a master clevis setting, and you get to reset it up, and that's a little more difficult than you care to do. Not terribly hard, but you got to reset that.
Measure the gap or something?
Huh?
Measure the gap.
Got to measure the gap and set it all up and redo it. So you want to be very careful how much you adjust that. And it's kind of weird because one side has coarse threads and the other side has fine threads, and that's so that as you turn it, it moves at a different rate and spreads it out and back together. But anyway, so how am I going to set this?
According to the manufacturer's directions.
Come on. What do you think the manufacturer's directions are going to tell you?
Just sit the idle.
Well, first thing is, if you get a carburetor or a servo unit or anything back from overhaul, buy a new one, put it on. First thing, don't mess with it. All right, don't screw anything in 1 1/4 turns, but just leave it alone. Put it on the airplane and see how it acts. Chances are it's pretty dang close. Chances are it'll need some adjustment, but it'd be pretty dang close. All right, so put it on and see how it acts first. So here on out, that's the answer. How do I know it's right? Oh, I'm going to screw it in 1 1/2 turns and back it out this many. No. What are we going to do? Put it on the aircraft and see how it acts. So how am I going to do that? Install it. Put the hose on and safety it and the torque stripe and all that. Run some shop air through it. And, okay.
Out those, put those floats real good.
Okay, so what are we going to do? Now it's all installed and ready to go.
Run the engine.
Yeah, start it up and run it. All right. How do I know if the idle mix is set correctly? Pull it into idle cutoff and watch the engine die. It should go 25 to 50, depending on manufacturer, and then die. Well, how do you suppose it works with this fuel injection system?
Same.
Would you say exactly the same? You'd be exactly correct. It is exactly the same. You start it up, you pull the red knob out, and you watch and see what happens. If it goes up 25 to 50 RPM and dies, guess what?
You're good to go.
You're all done. If it doesn't, if it just dies, then what do you do? Rich it up. So you're just going to take this little wheel, and it's not safety or anything. There's actually a spring right behind it that just runs right along here, and it's got little notches, and the spring just sits at a notch to keep it from moving. So just push the spring out of the way if you want. Otherwise, just spin it and it'll make the spring go. But push the spring out of the way and give it a little turn or so in the direction the arrow shows for the R. Get back in the engines, the aircraft, start it up, and try it again. And if it works, you're done. All right. Let's see here. What other kind of things could we possibly have on a carburetor? I do mean fuel injection. Enrichment system. You're going to be shocked at this one. How do you suppose I could make a simple enrichment system? Crickets. What are some of the ways we did it in carburetors and pressure carbs?
Step up needle.
Good one. Step up needle. That would actually work quite well. Let me see. What else?
The difference in fuel pressures between the fuel going to the engine and the fuel from the pump, the metered fuel and the unmetered.
Say that again.
Difference in pressures between metered fuel and non-metered fuel with the spring.
Oh yeah, we could change the difference in the fuel metering force. Well, they actually do it quite easily here. That's supposed to be jet. How about a system that uses a jet parallel to the main system?
That's like the PR58.
Oh yeah. So PR58 uses the same idea. Just create a parallel jet. Or, well, not or, that's how it works. As the throttle is opened, I don't think I have a picture of this one. And enrichment, jet is opened. Allowing more fuel. We talked quite a bit already about this. We'll just add some notes. Manual mixture control. How does it work? What's its basic principle? Anybody?
Pull a knob and it changes how much fuel is allowed in.
That is accurate. How does it do that?
It, depending on the, well, it usually closes off the metered fuel going into the engine. The fueling
Let's
valve.
think about the Marvel Shoveler. How does it do it on the Marvel Shoveler?
There's a valve.
Valve that does what?
It meters the amount of fuel coming out of the carburetor.
Well, I thought the main metering jet did that.
It does until the valve is small. The valve orifice is smaller than the main metering jet.
Ah, so once that gets smaller than the main metering jet, then what?
Then the mixture control is the main metering jet basically.
Very good. Then the mixture control becomes the main metering jet. So that's it. Effectively reduces the size of the main metering jet. I've got a bunch of notes, so I think I'll just leave it at that. Automatic mixture control. And let's pull that up. There we go. Does that look somewhat familiar?
Yes.
I don't know if we talked about anything new yet this week at all, really. So we have a Bellows Assembly right here, which has what kind of needle? Inverted. Yeah, so it's inverted. So as I lose my laser here, I just get a little hand. I don't know when I enlarge it. I don't know what that does. Ooh, it makes it move around. I see. All right. So just hi everybody, wave. Okay. So we have a sealed bellows assembly. As we go up into altitude, what happens to this? It expands. So if it expands, what's it going to do?
Allow bleed air between the two chambers.
I like that. Allows we said bleed air between the two chambers. So right now, we'll assume that we're at low altitude. So we have impact air coming in, and can it go this way? No, just comes around here and does the same thing. Uh-oh, I don't have a bleed down here. Is this thing going to fill up and blow up?
No.
No? Okay, that's silliness. All right, so, and then we have suction right here, and uh-oh, there's no bleed. Does that mean it's going to suck this thing right out through into the venturi?
No.
Okay. All right, so stop saying that. All right, so as we climb up in altitude, this will start expanding, And so some of this impact air is going to come here and find an opening right here. So instead of going this way and adding pressure here, it's just going to find its way through here and back out. All done. And what happens if the bellows assembly gets a hole in it?
It'll operate
It's like, Steve, stops working. Stop is correct. And then what does that mean?
Manual mixture control is the only way to adjust the mixture.
There we go. We're back to having no automatic mixture control. So it's called then a,
Manual
you got to do it manually.
Carb monkey mixture control.
Carb monkey. There's also the bullet type, which is actually located inside the throttle body. So we still have the same thing. We've got aneroid or bellows assembly right here. But it's exposed to the venturi suction because it's in here with it makes its own venturi basically. So it's exposed to the venturi suction, but it's going to do the same thing. So it's just in a different location exposed to the venturi suction. All right, automatic mixture control. Wow, I wrote like a whole stinking page. Let's see if we can get rid of that. Uses a bellows. That is filled with helium. Works independently and separate from the manual mixture control. What system have we talked about that has a automatic mixture control that does not work independent of and not in parallel? I can't think of one either off the top of my head. But what system did we study that works just like this that is part of the manual mixture control? Yeah, PS5. PS5 worked very similar, but it's part of the manual mixture control. Works independently of and in parallel with the manual mixture control. By providing a variable orifice between air chambers. And that should be 2, sorry. 2. And we'll make this 3. I'm kind of skipping some stuff here. As air pressure. That wasn't a real sneeze. So as air pressure or the temperature changes, the bellows reacts. So lower air pressure. Is that higher altitude or lower altitude? Okay, high altitude. It's going to expand. And if it expands, it creates that little leak and lowers the air metering force. If we have higher air pressure, as in low altitude, it's going to contract, which will close off the air bleed, which will then give us back more air metering force. If we have a higher temp, it is going to expand. And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes.
Yes is not an answer. Is it a good thing? Yes. All of the above. That's a good thing because remember, as the temperature goes up, so does our density altitude. Just like I'm telling you here in the middle of summer when you're listening to the weather report, and there's even though we're at 75 feet, it may say the density altitude is 1,500 feet. Well, my airplane's going to think it's at 1,500 feet because the air is hot, even though I'm here. And so cooler temp, it's going to contract and increase the air metering force and keep things rich. All right, one more point, we'll do a break. That's the bullet type where the bellows is located in the throttle body. And housing forms the venturi. So really, instead of it being on the sidewalls, it's more in the middle of the throttle body and works the same way. Yes.
What's that inverted needle called?
Inverted needle.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's what I call it. Anybody have a better name for that? Oops, I don't want to write that. Works the same as bellows type, but exposed to venturi section rather than impact. All right, there we go.